Do we have anybody in the public with a maximum of 3 minutes on any subject that is within the jurisdiction of the Measure P and Measure S oversight, but is not on the agenda?
I don't have any callers, and I didn't receive any emails, comments from the public.
Okay. Then if we could move on, do we have any board member comments about any asking for any questions from the committee, asking for questions for clarification? Anybody? No? Okay, then let's move on. We start on review expenditures from July 1, 2019 through May 31, 2020 for conformance to Measure P and Measure S language. This is continued from the July 13th meeting.
Yeah, correct. And I could do the easy one off the bat. I think that there was a charge for a fan rental from Hodges Rental for a charter school that Rick had pointed out in the storm drain. I don't know if you recall that one. We had a check that was issued for that. We confirmed the details with that, and that was actually related to our installation. I thought at that point it was related to the installation of pump station number 11, our storm drain system. Actually, it was related to an installation of our pipe lining for storm drain over by that charter school. It had the notice for the charter school, and what had happened was there were some fumes that were getting through that process from the curing of the pipeline, and that was what the rental was for that. That's how I had the charter school notation on that one. That was a minor one, I'm sure, but I just wanted to make sure we were up to speed on that one. There was like a charge that was questioned, and that was the answer for that one. I think the bigger part of the process that we wanted to discuss further was the city's method for charging labor benefits and overhead for our staffing. To that end, what we've done is we've created a memo to identify how that process is working. And this is where I'm going to lean on Lisa a little bit to possibly share her screen. I don't know if we have that available for the group here. I'm looking at the agenda. I'm not seeing that memo here. Lisa, can you help me with that?
The indirect cost one?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did get that.
Okay.
I'm looking for it right now, and I can share it on my screen.
That'd be awesome. We can walk through that memo, Lisa, if you can find that and share that up there, and then we can go through our process with that and answer any questions, of course, as we go through it. Do you guys have a chance to look at that document ahead of time?
Yes.
And so, Steve, I would say on the up front here, I went through the document. For what that is worth, it makes sense. I understand the document. My question from the last meeting wasn't, this document outlines, as far as I can tell, how overhead and indirect costs are computed, and that the method used by the city is consistent with what is done elsewhere in the state. That's all fine, but my question from last meeting was not how those costs and numbers are computed, but if that is new, if that is a change, the fact that they're being computed at all and included in the costs of the capital projects, if that is a change from what it was previously.
So the way we're displaying it is a change. That's why it pointed out through our process, the way we're displaying it, and there was that large number that we saw for the, I'm going to open the document here for expenditure stuff. I'm just on a different computer I have over here, where it listed out labor and benefits for our hourly rates for our guys. And then it had a number that was listed below, which was titled, what's it titled here? It was titled labor overhead and UAAL, which was bulked out. That was just a way to, it was a change in how we displayed it. Those charges were always there. They were blended into the staffing before, and in an effort to be more transparent, it came out this way, and obviously it caused some confusion. There is a modification that the city did in terms of its protocols that happened in 18-17. I think that memo identifies when we went through that.
Yeah.
But that was a citywide change for our engineering projects for across the board for our team. It's charged the same way for the Army, as well as NIP, NCIP, as well as capital projects and Measure P. Just try to get us to a uniform process for our chargings.
So a quick question, Rick Hoyer. Have you noticed that with the NIP, on the NIP costs?
Let's put it this way. In my view, it's being illegally charged to the NIP. Because NIP, the nature of the fund, does not call for it. But yes, NIP pays overhead in multiple different ways. The question I had from last meeting was if, and Carol, I remember back in one of the very early meetings,
yep.
We had the discussions with Jimmy, so this predates Lauren. Something was being included and we objected and he said it would no longer be included. I thought that was overhead, but I could be mistaken, but we need to go back and figure out what that was.
What I think it was at the time was it was his, if I remember, and again, we need to go back and look, that it was his salary being divided out among the projects, or our projects. And it was like, you know, I have the right to charge my salary back to you. And we did discuss that. And I believe that was going to be backed out, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it was with NIP, we have two different sets of overhead. There's the direct related to the engineering and, you know, basically what we're talking about here. And then also they were wanting to be charging the formula that they charge all of the enterprise funds to have them pay for the city manager, the city attorney, finance, and all of that. And I don't remember if it was that we were objecting to or related to the department itself.
Yeah, Rick, and I think that from my memory, we can go back and look at documents certainly, but from my memory, that is exactly the case. It was the Jimmy Forbes, it was the city attorney's time, city manager's time. That was which is charged to NCIP, which I know you have a little bit of struggle with, and it was those specific charges that we
I view it as illegal.
There you go. But those were the charges that we were looking at not placing into the NCIP. So that's why they're not there. We do have the fully, I hate to use the word fully burdened, but the engineer's charges are there. And that's that secondary one that you're talking about, city attorney, city clerk, city manager, those charges was the discussion not to include in these funds. But we can certainly go back in the books. That's my recollection.
Yeah,
go ahead.
That was mine as well, Steve, if I remember correctly. It was like, you know, because Jimmy's comment was, you know, we can charge that to you. And it's like, no, you're not. And I believe it.
Yeah, because the ability to charge back on that is specific to enterprise funds. And Measure P is not an enterprise fund, and IP is not an enterprise fund. So, but that's not what we're discussing here. This is the overhead within the department, which at the end of the day, we're always told that it's cheaper for the city to be doing it all than and you'd be paying that if you had a bid. May or may not be true. I've never seen a direct comparison specific to a job.
Well, and the other too, Rick, that we've talked about is the fact that if you added up all of the chargebacks to the different projects, will that person be paid 1 time, 2 times, 3 times? How many times their salary will it add up to at the end of the year in the chargebacks?
Yeah, and then the chargebacks, basically the process, we don't double dip in our process. We divide that by an overall a number of hours, and we don't double dip for our processes. So for that aspect of it, I know for certain. The first part of the question, though, just escaped me when I was answering that one.
Well, it was, you know, we're continually told that it's cheaper for the city to be doing it and with all the overhead and all the rest because you'd be paying for that with a private contractor. We've never seen a direct comparative of a bid versus what the city would be charging for.
Well, so basically, it's hard to.
The question becomes, for the public, it looks like you're basically subsidizing city staff with the sales tax funds, which were meant to be building streets and sidewalks and storm drains.
Right. So part of our documentation is we prepared some comparable rates for consultants that we have from our current contract, which is from 16, which is due to be updated. And we're actually going out for bids for consultants right now. Part of the challenge, though, Rick, is that when we do the professional services, we don't get bids for that work. We don't. We get quotes. We get a not to exceed from those consultants. It's not a low bid type situation as it is for construction. Construction is always low bid, and that rules the day, and we go forward with that. We're talking about the design fees and the design process, where we actually look at the best process to go through and get that done based upon knowledge and experience of the individual consultant. That's why sometimes we use our own staff, sometimes we use Whitson, sometimes we use Wallace, and we identify where that certain expertise lies. Unfortunately for the process, or unfortunately whatever, a lot of the determination of the best staff comes down to my determination, of the NCIP or NCIP. It comes up to Jeff, or it was Jeff, but it comes down to my recommendation and staff's recommendation of how we can solve something. As an example, is in Measure P, we have ADA component, the traffic signals. It's better for us to get a consultant like Kimley Horn on the line to make sure that we're getting our electrical diagrams and electrical signaling proper, because we don't have that in-house expertise to do that. So even if we wanted to do that, we get a consultant to do that process. Other aspects, overlays, storm drains, curb gutters and stuff, that stuff our staff is very capable of handling without too much difficulty. And then the comparable rate that we usually go by, is our fully burdened rate versus the fully burdened rate of the consultants, which we have through our bid process. So it's not like it's not an either or and type situation. It's a combination. It's not where we can say, you know what, I'm going to have the street designed by Whitson, and it's going to have a certain cost to it, and I'm going to design that same project by my own staff, and it's going to have a certain cost, because I don't do that process, because that's a duplicative effort to try to figure out how I'm going to design the same project from two different sources. What we do, however, though, is make sure we have the appropriate staff on board to design it in an appropriate way, and utilizing the consultants as an augmentation of city staff. With the hourly rates, though, our staff is cheaper. And the thing that I will remind folks is that even though we go through a process where we get a consultant on board, someone has to manage that consultant, and someone has to make sure that that consultant is performing their duties. So even if I have a senior engineer from, you name the firm, coming through the process, I still have to have someone make sure that they're doing the work in a way that's appropriate with city staff. So there's an oversight component that needs to be added to that, the use of a consultant as well. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but basically that's how we go through this process of designing these projects.
Well, when I was discussing, having a conversation with Ron about legal and about how we figure out what legal is, and his comment was, well, we don't have a general surgeon do brain surgery. So if there are things that need to be done that are outside of the general expertise of city engineers, that would require something like that, that's when we're looking to hire somebody with a more specific expertise. And we did see too, and it might be something that you compare, that you see, here's the rate, hourly rate, because I got to see that with legal. Here's the hourly rate of the city attorney, assistant city attorney, blah, blah, blah. And here's the rate of, XYZ attorney firm to do consulting. So, I mean, again, that in general, I think overall, it was all more expensive to get the outside to do the work.
So, sorry, I had internet problems, so I kind of missed the first 10 minutes of the meeting, but if I could jump in, I think in working with Tom and Steve, one of the important things for me is how sound is the accounting practice? How is this relative to best practice? How is this relative to other agencies that have robust capital projects? Are we an outlier in trying to extract money from a restricted revenue? Certainly, all of us have integrity. So me being new, I really looked at it from that perspective. And I thought it was important that we provide a document for the record that creates good documentation as to how we approached it. and we're very transparent. You know, Tom said we looked at these benchmarks. These are quality cities. And we said, you know, let's look at how they do it and how are we within that band? Are we an outlier? Are we within the band? Are we doing something that is considered within the realm of best practices? And so that's what we wanted to be transparent about. I said, you know, Tom, please put together a document that everyone can kind of read and can explain our basis and how sound the basis is. And the conclusion for me is, are we within the band of these other cities within the practice? And we are, and I think that's important. I think the other thing that we provided in this document is how much is the city's hourly rate by these different job classifications compared to third-party vendors? And then when I look at that, those are all favorable. And I don't know if you all understood what we provided there, but in the additional exhibit, you'll see the hourly rates in the blue and green columns. That compares the city's average rate by job classifications relative to the 2 other third parties that we've used on various capital projects. And I can tell you that even based on the averaging, because we have employees on the lower end with the type of benefits they have, and then the higher end, regardless of where they are on that average, all those job classification is actually a savings relative to not using third party. And that's including what we're debating here, which is the indirect cost. To me, at the end of the day, I feel that that is sound. You know, we can debate whether or not we want to charge the measured P&S money, but I can tell you as a CPA, I can tell you that this is a sound practice. And I feel more comforted by the fact that when we look at those classifications and compare them to the 2 third-party providers, they're all a savings, and they're all a pretty substantial savings too. So I kind of look at a few things in terms of benchmarks, like as a taxpayer, is this legit? Is it okay? I think it is, to be honest with you. And I respect you, Rick, very much. And I know you're very passionate about this, but I look at it from that professional perspective, and this is what I submit to you. You know, so I just wanted to chime in and give you my 2 cents, and also kind of explain to you what we did in the exhibit at the very bottom, where we compared the different classifications and compared it with the 2 vendors. And you could see for yourself, it's very transparent that even with the indirect costs, these positions all are well below those 2 vendors.
Yeah, and so Lauren, for me, I think this is maybe part of what you missed. I said I understand the document and it all makes sense, but you know, I see it the same way you do as far as that document goes. So that wasn't the question I had last meeting. It was, and you brought this up, you know, debating whether they should be included, whether they should be charged at all. That and Rick said this a little earlier too today, that the money, you know, is the money collected by the measure to go exclusively and totally to fixing streets as opposed to people's salaries. You know, as far as if you know, does it make more sense to manage a project in-house or go to a consultant or an outside contractor? I think a certain level of trust has to be given to Steve and his staff, the entire city staff, to make the best call on that. And I think we could easily get way into the weeds on trying to, you know, to track all of that. So I personally, I'm okay with that. And then finally, back to a question that I think it was Carol brought up. When we are allocating a portion of salary, city staff salary, to these projects, at the end of the year, where did we end up? Did we collect 1.5 times the staff salary, or you know, 2/3 of the staff salary is? Which, you know, and then we can debate, is that an appropriate amount? But I'm wondering, I think that's an important aspect of this documentation. And I'm wondering if somehow that could be included in our periodic and certainly annual reports.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. The question is just to make sure that when we do all the cost accounting, we haven't charged someone more than 100% of his or her time. And so there's two components, right? One is the direct cost, which is based on payroll. So you can only allocate 100% of the person's direct cost. Some of it may wind up staying in the home department, but we wouldn't charge more than 100% of direct cost. Then the indirect cost is a percentage of the direct cost. So an indirect cost is always a function of that direct cost. So we wouldn't charge more than 100% of the direct cost. And so by function of the method, that wouldn't happen. Because
For any given, for any given project, I see that because that's what's on there. I'm wondering, my question is at the end of the year, not per a given project, but at the end of the year, we have multiple projects with multiple allocations. And what was the total to employee A throughout the number of projects executed that year compared to what his actual salary is?
By virtue of the way the system is set up, we cannot allocate more than 100% of the person's time because the projects are based on timesheets, and that's how we allocate the cost out. Does that make sense? So we take the timesheet, we take the project in the timesheet, and we push up the cost from there. Because it's integrated with timesheet, we can't allocate more than 100%. So even if we were to add it back up from the bottom up, it can't add up to more than the sum of the original amount, right?
So in effect, what you're saying is at the end of each pay period, you're taking all the timesheets for that, and that shows all the hours they worked, and those are broken up and spread out. So
right, the system does that.
You'd be paying them overtime, basically.
Say that again, that last part.
So if you allocated more than that, in effect, it's almost like paying overtime, but which wasn't actually on the timesheets.
Right. And because of the way the system designed, the system has integrity in making sure that we push the project cost based on payroll. So we can't inherently charge more than what payroll is unless staff made an error and did some sort of crazy adjustment, which we don't typically do. So the payroll system drives the project accounting cost, Rick, and so it can't sum up more than what the payroll timesheet is. Does that make sense?
I have
The indirect cost is a percentage of the direct cost, which is what this transparent memo was about, to say, here's what's the component of the indirect cost. That is a piggyback onto the direct cost. But because project accounting is inherent in payroll, it will always sum up to the person's timesheet.
So I have a question. So at the end of every pay period, does every hour of every full-time employee have to be allocated to a project, or may it be allocated to the department?
So I can answer that one. Basically, what happens is the engineers, whatever they're working on, they will fill a line item out for every aspect of their days. Essentially, our rule is 15 minutes of time increments that we're going through that process. If there's a time that's for training and so forth, they put it into the home time. If they put it towards a project, it's labeled for a project. That's how finance is able to go through the process and present these spreadsheets broken down by project and hours, because at the end of the year, it summates all those time cards and keeps that running total for us. So it's not uncommon for, you'll see Tom Corman on here a bunch of times, to have, 3 pages of, each timesheet has, 10 lines on it, 3 pages of projects that he's working on as a portion of that process. And each individual project, whether it's CIP, NCIP, MHP, whatever, is charged based upon what he's working on through that process. And I picked Tom or one of the inspectors because they go through that process and they're more diverse in the things they oversee. Someone like a Jesus Rios, who is really dedicated to doing some drafting and so forth, or some delivery of the Measure P drafting, he might charge maybe 80% of his time for any given pay period to Measure P or S, because he's working on putting those projects forward.
But it would never be that they were in the office on any day or working on any day and not have their time at any point in time during the year allocated to general expense in your department rather than being assigned to a project. Is that correct?
So basically what they do is they go through and identify where their home time is. We call that the home, because basically it's not chargeable. It's training. It's something like that. That doesn't get allocated towards a project. It's spread across different things through the overall cost analysis and that aspect of it. But there is no time where we say, hey, you know what, I'm filling up time, so I'm going to put it to Measure P because I don't have anything else to do that Tuesday. That's not the way the system works. And if that helps.
But
And
that's,
it wouldn't be to Measure P, it'd be to a specific project within Measure P.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
but then it still can be, as you said, it still can be spread across all the projects. Their home time is still spread across all the projects?
It's spread across the entire workload from the division, being it PMSA, being that's that generalized aspect of it, because that time has to go somewhere, and there's a description of how much time is spent across. That's the cost allocation plan that's prepared. So essentially, that's the accounting that goes through. I'm getting out of my depth here, and I'm going to look at Lauren for a little bit, but that's part of
the
it.
indirect costs. So Carol, there's two components of an employee's time, which is kind of, I think, what we're drilling into. One is the direct cost, where person A works 4 hours on the project, clocks that in the timesheet, and then he might spend 2 hours on another project, and then 2 hours just general admin, which you know what Steve is saying is the home department. That 2 hours and the composition of that catch-all 2 hours becomes indirect costs that's spread across NCIP, CIP, and then also within the general fund itself. So that's the indirect cost component of this memo. Does that make sense, Carol? So there's a direct portion, that 4 hours that he actually spent on a specific project, 4 hours gets charged there. And then a percentage of this 2 hours that's in the home department for general administration is then charged back based on the study that we do every year. And that's kind of what we're debating here, is this indirect cost component. But that's how the timesheet works. There's a direct project portion and then a home department portion.
So what exactly is in the indirect cost per hour?
Okay.
Because when you see it at, for example, Maximilian Reiser in one item, he's got 80.41 hourly rate, indirect cost per hour of 61.84.
Right. So based on that memo, it's got various components, right? It has, for the person, the various benefits such as vacation, sick leaves, and other types of leaves. And then for G&A, general administration, that's general support, and also computer and other equipment related to engineer services.
How much vacation do city employees accrue?
Depends on how much time they have in the books.
I mean, low end to high end.
2 to 5
Weeks?
2 to 4, 2 to 5 weeks.
So does that go into indirect costs when used or accrued?
I think it's when it's used, because they have some leave time, like in the, let's play out the concerns of Carol on the timesheet. Person takes a day off, 8 hours. They're not going to clock that and force it into projects. So that'll just fall into the home department. That 8 hours would then be allocated as a function of indirect costs amongst NCIP, CIP, NPS, and then also the general fund and other places.
Okay. I mean, from my standpoint, indirect costs at that level to me just bother me in general. But that's not in our control. What I do like is, now that I've gotten into the sheet more, is the grid with the comparative of the all-in for the hourly with the other vendors. I think Steve actually addresses what I was asking you about earlier. I mean, to me, the biggest question mark raised is if you're Joe Public and you're looking at it,
Right.
you start seeing all overhead being charged. There needs to be something that justifies it and shows it.
Absolutely.
And here we have something that does that, whether we may or may not like it, but
Right.
at least it's there for the public, which is our major function.
I totally respect this conversation, and it's added a lot more work for us, but I think what's really important is that we're going to have a record that's good for everyone to see. We're being transparent, and it's two bases. One is the objectivity and the sound practice. We look at other reputable agencies. And two is, at the end of the day, are taxpayers saving money because we're doing it this way? I think is the most important question, because we can force the issue and then go, okay, our hands are tied as administrator and we're going to have to outsource. And you can see in that comparison, outsourcing is going to cost taxpayers more money. And while we might win on principle, we just paid a lot more money as taxpayers. And I don't like that, right? And so I think this was a very good exercise. And I even offer the idea that maybe periodically, I don't want to offer a real great frequency, but periodically we look at this and say, you know, is the city cost allocation still comparable to our vendors? Are we still coming out ahead? Because, you know, you taxpayer as the oversight committee need to hold us accountable to say that our indirect costs still keep us as a sound practice, right? Because that's what that table does. Is like at the end of the day, doing it in-house better be a lot better than outsourcing it.
Right.
Right. And this was actually a very good discussion.
Well, and in the amount of work, I think, yes, I totally understand the amount of work, but you also understand that if you want the taxpayers to continue to support this and continue to support after the period of time that this ends, and honestly, streets, drains, and sidewalks are still going to need work because there's no money anywhere for to help keep them up, that you're going to have the support of the taxpayers, favorable support of the taxpayers in order to get it done again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. I totally agree in being transparent, because one of the conversations was, how do we submit this document into the record? We can just submit it to you, or we could create an item on the agenda. And we said, let's create an item on the agenda. Then there's a clean record. People can search it. They know we had a cool, big, robust conversation about it. I even offer the idea that maybe once a year we do this analysis and make sure we're still benching really well in comparison with our third-party contracts. I mean, we want to be on top of our game, honestly, with you.
Well, and that too, not only this one, but in other tax measures, if they don't have a sense of security of what's happening in the city, it's like, why would we vote for anything else when we already don't feel comfortable with what's happening with another tax measure? You know, I mean,
Absolutely.
that can bleed across when you want to get something else done.
Right. Absolutely. I can appreciate working with Steve that with the large portfolio of our capital projects, there is some inherent benefits to having some of this stuff in-house, because we can navigate and repackage the projects and then outsource where it's more expensive as needed. And to the extent we have this large portfolio of projects between NPS, CIP, and NCIP, and also Measure P and S, it does make sense. And you can see with the numbers financially, it does make sense.
Well, and I think some of it too, when you've got projects, as Steve has done a really good job of combining NIP, Measure P, I mean, in one project, including a bunch of different things in order to get the project done the most cost effectively, that sometimes I think would make sense as well.
Right. Where do we go from here? Did this answer some of the pressing questions? Do you have other questions? We want to meet your needs.
Thank you for accommodating us on this. That it answers a lot of questions for me.
I'm fine with it.
Good.
Yeah, I am too. So
Good.
do we need then to, now that we've reviewed, to vote to accept the expenditures as
I
presented?
guess we're taking our agenda out of order, huh?
Well, it says review expenditures. So
Yeah, I think that's,
review, we don't need to vote on it then. Yeah.
well, we should, I think, endorse. Well, I think we've been talking on item 4, and I think our opinions are in the record, and we appreciate tremendously the information provided.
Good. We're happy.
From my standpoint, it makes me ready to be voting on the other 2 items that we have on the agenda that we continued from last time.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. We started with review the expenditures and then we're right to indirect costs.
Yeah. Well, they were all interrelated. That was why
We had to see that in order to be able to review the expenditures.
and then be comfortable with it. Yeah.
Yes. I know. Okay, so back to 2. We now have sufficiently reviewed the expenditures for conformance to Measure P and S language?
I'll make a motion that we find them in conformance. I mean, Steve got us the answer for the one item that we had questions on with the fan, and the other item that we had questions on for delaying was the overhead aspect. I'll make a motion. We find them consistent.
Second.
Do we have any discussion, any committee discussion? Do we need Lisa, we need a roll call vote, or we
Actually, we need to ask for public input.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I said, do we have
I don't think there's any public watching, but
do we have any public comment?
No, I don't have any public watching, and I don't have any public comments at this time.
okay.
I'm offended that the public doesn't want to watch this as much as they want to see it.
We do still need to approve the minutes from July.
Ah,
So we have a motion from Rick Hoyer, a second from Rick Aldinger. No discussion? Do we have all in favor, or shall we, you want to do roll call, Lisa?
Oh, correct. Okay, let's see. So I have Patrick Aldinger's,
Yes.
Carol Chavagian.
Yes.
Nicholas Sina.
Yes.
Yes. Rick Hoyer
yes.
and Judy Sanderlin. I do not have Judy Sanderlin.
So we have a unanimous vote of those in attendance, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Shall we then now move on to the periodic report for July 1, 2019 through May 30, 2020, that was also continued from the July 13th meeting.
I'll move for approval.
Second.
We find it consistent.
So we have a motion from Rick Hoyer, second by Rick Aldinger. Do we have any public comment about this item?
I do not have any public comment.
Any discussion from any of the committee? Then could we have a roll call vote, please, on this?
Patrick Aldinger,
Yes.
Carol Chavagian,
Yes.
Nicholas Sina,
Yes.
Rick Hoyer,
Yes.
and I do not have Judy Sanderlin.
Okay, again, we have a unanimous vote of those, the committee in attendance. That's very nice, Lisa. At the city council now, they've been messing around with them as to when Tyler got called first and he wasn't ready for it. It's very nice to keep us in alphabetical order.
Technically, you're supposed to rotate it, actually, but
Well, that's what they've been doing, and it's like,
because that way whoever is at the end can always wait to see how the vote's going before they vote.
that's true. That's true.
I don't think we have that suspense here, though.
No, again, I'm offended that we don't have that kind of drama.
That's fabulous, Rick. I didn't know that. That totally makes sense.
That's the main reason for randomly rotating it through, so that everyone has to be first at some point and everyone can be last at some point.
Totally makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. I sit on way too many of these calls.
Clearly.
Years of experience.
So do we still need to go back and approve minutes from last time?
Yep.
Do we have has everyone seen the minutes, and do we have a move then to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve minutes.
I'll second it. So we have a motion by Rick Aldinger, a second by Carol Chavagian. Do we have any public comment?
No public comments.
Do we have any discussion from the committee? No? Then may we please have a roll call vote for the approval of the minutes?
Okay, and I'll switch up the order. Okay, Carol Chavagian,
Yes.
Rick Hoyer,
Yes.
Nicholas Sina,
Yes.
Patrick Aldinger,
Yes.
and no Judy Sanderlin.
Again, motion passes unanimously with those in attendance. Thank you very much. Number 4, indirect costs. I believe that we have now, that's all taken care of, correct? We don't need to beat that horse anymore.
Well, I'll make a motion. We accept and understand the report on indirect costs.
I'll second that.
I have a quick question about that.
Okay.
This is not the only committee. This is not the only measure. This is not the only time that you all have indirect costs. And as we were having the discussion, I was trying to find when we went through this before, and it was back around August of 2016, we went through almost the exact same process of outlining and discussing what these are. What my question is this standardized throughout the entire city in terms of the way of presenting the data? I mean, it seems as if everybody should see things the same way and understand. So the question is not, is the data supposed to be here? It's just, is it accurate or is it inaccurate, right?
I'll speak to that quick from an NIP process standpoint. NIP actually has an audit committee that meets once a year or more with Lauren, and we actually audit all the costs related to the different overheads and allocations. So we're literally diving in a much deeper level than here because it's been a bone of contention in NCIP for a long time.
But in terms of like, if we do this or if we don't, so when I was reading through the minutes from August or from 2016, it was identified that this is, and I don't remember whom, Jimmy, that was his name. He had stated, yes, this is basically the way we do it in each area, and it was accepted by us at that time. And so is the intent do we go through this periodically to re-identify and just, reconfirm for the public, or are we accepting once and then moving forward indefinitely?
No, I think Lauren, I think it's, as Lauren said, I mean, it's a good to be upfront and to be transparent. It's a good idea for it to be periodically with us, as with all of them, but to be have the city presented so that the taxpayers, residents and the taxpayers are feeling comfortable with how the projects are being done and how it's being charged, so that they feel that it's fair and open and being charged properly. Yeah, I think absolutely it needs to be done periodically, not just once every 4 years.
So Rick, I'll speak to your point. If I understand some of your concerns, the practice that we've outlined in the
Actually, it
memo.
wasn't Rick. Or the
Oh, I'm sorry.
which Rick was.
That was Nick.
Nick. We've got two, a Rick, and Nick. So Nick, I think that the concern I'm hearing from you is this inconsistent, consistent, and is it unique to just maybe measure P&S money? The practice that we've put together is a sound practice that we could feel that can be implemented for the upcoming years. It is consistent with how we're handling it for NCIP, for Measure P and NPS. So our capital project accounting of indirect costs are pretty consistent. And as Carol says, I think it's a good process for us as a committee to look at this periodically, maybe once a year, to kind of look at that and kind of measure it and say, how are we still relative to third-party vendors? More frequently than that, I'm not sure if it adds any value, to be honest with you. But maybe once a year we look at it and say, hey, are we still saving money? Because at the end of the day, that's how we prove that the math works.
No, I follow that, and I'm not questioning that any of the accounting or any of those pieces. I'm just going from our processes pieces. And so, like, because we had previously asked about auditing back then, and if we should be relooking at these numbers or anything like that. And what Jimmy had stated was the city, if information is presented to us, then you all go through an annual audit process.
Right.
And if the audit process reveals that like false information was presented to us, that's a you all issue that will have ramifications everywhere. So we all can assume that the numbers that you're presenting to us are truthful. And so there's no reason for anybody to like question that. And so it's really just the process in terms of you all presenting that information. This is what the city costs and this is what outside vendors cost. I agree with that. I think most people would want, if the city's less expensive, we should be going that direction. I don't think anybody's debating that. But my question just is, does this committee need to review that specifically? Or is that something that like Steve, your group deals with lots of committees. And so is that a standardized document? Look, this is that we go through every year. Steve, this is what we cost, and this is what our individual vendors. And so here is our standardized document that we can present to anybody for our year, showing this is what our annual expenditures are versus a commercial expenditure.
So Steve, can I comment before? So if I can offer my perspective, I think the question is more about internal controls. to what extent does this committee or other committee really need to do an audit? And it goes back to what are some of the core internal controls in the city? What is the city already being audited on that ensures what you present is sound? And mind you, I used to be a senior auditor for one of the big 6 international CPA firms. And so I think if I understand you correctly, Nick, correct me if I'm mistaken, but to what extent does an oversight committee need to drill down into stuff, right? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, I don't want us to have to do, you all to do double work is basically.
Correct.
If it
Correct.
is done, can't that just be shared what has already been done?
Right. So let me share with you, just given my audit background and kind of how the city is audited, there's a couple of controls, right? We have an independent third-party audit of our financial statements every year. And then in addition, we have what's called federal grant audit. Our city is very blessed that we get so many federal grants. It hits a threshold where we actually have a second annual audit that pertains to grants. In both of those processes, they do a lot of timesheet testing, payroll testing, and project accounting testing. It may not be a Measure P or S project, but the fact that they do testing on project accounting for grants, they're testing the system and the inherent soundness of the system. Does that make sense? And so in those other audit process, if they identify weaknesses on our payroll system or our project cost accounting system, that would actually manifest the problems in other projects, not just unique to like a FEMA grant or Cal Transportation grant. So I feel reassured that certainly you all don't need to duplicate that work. I'm not going to prevent you if you want to explore that, but I don't think that's time well spent, because I think the federal grant audits, especially with project accounting, really satisfies those internal controls. So then I'll
So just to give you a level of work effort aspect of it. So every February we go through this for our numbers anyway, and presenting the documents for our numbers is not any additional layer of work. It's not that challenging for us to look at our numbers based upon different things that happen with our own staff in terms of negotiations, union, things of that changes our staff level in terms of compensation, as well as the cost for our consultants. We can do this with not a lot of, if any, extra work other than just taking a few minutes of this meeting to say, here's our latest rate. So in terms of the work effort for us, it's not a big deal for us actually going forward, because we're preparing it, like you said, for PMSA, for our other projects anyway. So I don't know if that helps you, Nick.
Yep.
And from my standpoint, our mandate is to ensure expenditures are consistent with what was on the ballot. I don't view it as, and the reason we got into the weeds a bit on what we did with the overhead was there was a different way of breaking it out. So all of a sudden we have a line item and a description that raised flags. So, okay, is this valid? Is it not?
Exactly.
To me, it's not getting into exactly how they came up with the numbers, what's being included and what isn't. It's because then I think we're getting too far in the detail. And in general, the city's financials are well run. I've been on a lot of these different oversight committees, and the level of accuracy of their financial information can vary dramatically. So but that's not what the city. It's, are they valid or not? So who are they spending it on? And understanding what does it mean when they're saying the indirect overhead and the other factor, and because if we get a question for the public, we need to be able to explain it to them. So it's not standpoint of, say, the level like NIP does, where they're literally looking at how things are estimated and really in the weeds of aspects. For us, my view is it consistent or not? I may not like what it was spent on, but if it's consistent with what it could be spent on, that's the only thing that matters.
Right.
Well, and I think the interesting thing when Lauren, is like, it's consistent. The process is consistent. And it was described to me that, I love this, that business is about production. Government is about process. And sometimes the process and the production don't match what their production doesn't match our production would be in from a business standpoint. But the process is correct. And that's the thing. The process was correct. And we may not, as you said, we may not like it, but the process was correct. And it does conform with the ballot measure.
Good.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. So are we all done now? I can't, now we've gone past, we voted on everything. Do we have anything
Did
else?
we actually vote on the indirect cost motion?
I believe that we did not, did we? We just kept going on it. Please, we did not, did we not? And may we, please, if we did not, have a roll call vote?
No, we began to.
Yes, okay. Oh, yeah. Nick had a
So I have a motion made by Rick, and then Carol, you seconded it.
Rick H.
Rick.
And given Carol, you seconded that. And then I'll go down the list. Let's see. Rick Hoyer?
Yes.
Nicholas Sina?
Yes.
Carol Shabajian?
Yes.
And Rick Aldinger.
Yes.
Perfect.
Lovely. Now we may adjourn. Can we have a motion to adjourn? Or do we need any public comment in before? Yes, Lauren.
I'd like to make a comment. I know we only have a few minutes before the meeting is over. I don't like surprises as staff, and I don't like to surprise those that I serve as well. So in our next upcoming meeting, which will be in October, we will be bringing forward to you some of the COVID budget adjustments for Measure P and S funds. As you're aware, there are impacts to the general fund sales tax, and so the Measure P and S funds are not unique or somehow protected from COVID. And so we will bring a report to council in September as to all the special revenues and other revenues and the fiscal impacts from COVID. We will then bring that forward to this committee in October as well. Steve and I have already been proactive. He's already restructured some of the bidding process so we don't get out ahead of ourselves for fiscal 21. And so the budget revision should not have an impact on some of the work that Steve's already been doing. So October, I believe, Stephen, chime in if I'm wrong, should still be timely, but I wanted to bring this to your attention so in October you're not surprised by this new information, because I try to avoid surprises as best as possible. Steve, did you want to chime in on that? We can't hear you. Okay.
I do my best work when my mic's off. So basically, just wanted to let folks know that we have a very large contract in Tykert who's doing the work right now in certain areas of town. And what we're looking at doing is focusing a little bit more on our curb returns, ADA transitions and stuff like that, which are smaller packages that are more nimble to respond as opposed to the current contract is a $6 million contract. The packages that we're putting forward now are concrete, sidewalks, and so forth that are more in that $500,000 range to be more nimble so we can be reacting to those funding situations coming forward to be able to react.
I agree, but I mean that I understand that. Not agree with it. I understand that, but I also want to make sure, Lauren, that we have one of our questions in the very beginning was, okay, we have Measure P for 4 years. At the end of 4 years, does the money have to be spent in that 4-year period? The answer was no. If there's money, the money has to be spent, but it does not have to be in that time frame. So my question is, yes, I understand we're going to make some adjustments, but how much money was there when times were good that still is now being spent from the past
Right.
rather than current?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we will have those robust conversations in October. I want to be mindful that this item wasn't agendized. So I just want to bring your attention to it so you're not surprised that we'll have a more in-depth conversation in October. And I think this is good as well, Carol, because you're expressing that you also want to have a conversation, not just about fiscal 21, but how is the fund balance evaluated? What is our fund balance as a part of the conversation, right?
Right. So if we'll get that agendized, then we make sure that we have that. Yeah. Because again, that was in the very beginning. It concerned me. It's like, oh God, do we have to spend it? And then no, we do not. Okay. Yeah.
No, the nice thing about having a separate fund is that it's segregated from the general fund. So there's no commingling or inadvertently spending it by the general fund. So the general ledger accounting is very discreet and very well controlled.
Right. Okay.
So I wanted to bring this to your attention so you're not surprised in October.
Is there anything else, again, that we'll have this meeting in October? Anything else, Nick, that you would like to have put on the agenda specifically? Anything you think of right now? I mean, we have time, but is there anything that you can think of right now?
No.
Okay.
No.
Good, thank you. So shall we move to adjourn? Everybody?
Yeah.
So moved.
Thank you, everybody.